In the early 2000s, a small British magazine, published for several years in Essex, published a curious story. A reporter for the publication interviewed a 52-year-old surgeon who told what I consider to be one of the most tragic and horrific stories of the accidental burial of living people. I don't know why this story hasn't received wider publicity, although it certainly deserves it. I tried to find mentions of this incident online, but to no avail. Finally, I recently turned to a friend of mine, a great admirer of English culture and the owner of a truly vast collection of urban legends and simply interesting stories about Old England, as he calls it. He delighted me with the text below. I should note that the text has been slightly reworked and, in the only surviving version, is less an interview and more of a coherent narrative. However, a friend assured me that this text is the original, with the exception of translation details, the deletion of the reporter's questions, and minor sentence connections for the sake of coherence. The narrator's direct speech, as well as all the author's notes, are faithfully reproduced. My name is David Catton, name changed, author's note. I was born in Norwich, in the east of England, where I lived with my parents until I was 18. After finishing school, I entered the newly founded University of Warwick in the West Midlands, and after graduating, I moved to Harlow, where I have lived with my family ever since. I have worked as a surgeon in a local hospital my entire life. I have a wife and 2 children. I have been a fan of Coventry City football since my youth, am passionate about astronomy and numismatics, and dream of visiting New York City and walking the length of Broadway Street. That's probably all you need to know about me. I don't see the need for that either, but since you insist. It happened about a month ago, April 23rd. To be exact, my wife discovered my body in the guest bedroom, on a bed. I was lying there, showing no signs of life. A doctor who arrived later pronounced me dead. I know him personally. We've worked at the same hospital for several years now, and I have no complaints against him. My body was taken to the morgue. They didn't perform an autopsy at the widow's insistence, and the very next day, preparations for the funeral ceremony began. A day later, I was buried. I learned all this later, but that's not why you came to me, right? Yes. You know, I once thought about how scary it must be to fall into a lethargic sleep and be mistakenly buried alive. Everyone has thought about that. Later, I came to the conclusion that for most unfortunate souls, it probably wasn't such a catastrophe because they all die in their sleep, never regaining consciousness. I was lucky in that regard. Apparently, I regained consciousness 5 to 7 hours after the burial. Everything was hazy. I'd briefly regain consciousness and then fall asleep again. I only remember one thing. Some part of me wondering the whole time, why was it so uncomfortable? Why so cramped and stuffy? But a heavy drowsiness, more like fainting, would take over time after time. I still don't know for sure whether it was a severe consequence of lethargy or whether the oxygen deficiency was starting to take its toll. At some point, I finally came to. I had no thoughts. I just lay there, blinking my eyes in confusion. My head was foggy, and before my eyes there was absolute blackness and not a single sound. It took me a while to realize I was awake. I don't remember how long I lay there, trying to figure out where I was and what was happening to me. My body was so cold and numb that I practically couldn't feel it. My head wasn't working, even in the morning, half asleep. It takes a long time to get your thoughts in order, let alone after more than 3 days of sleep. I had difficulty breathing and was very thirsty. I stretched my body as best I could, tensing my muscles one by one, then try to get up. I couldn't do it, nor could I move even a little. Something was restricting my movements. I remember my first completely idiotic thought: I'm tangled in the blanket. I tried to get up again and again to no avail. A conscious fear began to emerge, and that in turn grew into a suffocating terror. I jerked away, but I couldn't do that either. Where I was stuck, it was so cramped that I couldn't even breathe deeply. I wanted to scream. And at that moment, I made another unpleasant discovery. My lips were sewn together from the inside with neat stitches, and my jaws were held together with special clamps. This is what they do with the dead, so that their mouths are closed during the funeral ceremony. But I couldn't believe it. I groaned softly and, maddened by terror, began to thrash around even harder than before. Words cannot describe this fear. Exhausted, I burst into tears. Sobs shook my throat, but not a single sound escaped from my stitched lips and clenched jaws. I helplessly scratched at the wooden lid with my hands, knocked feebly, tried to tear the delicate silk upholstery with my nails, and cried bitterly like I'd never cried in my life. I was going crazy, spinning in my trap no longer like a rational person, but like a beetle trapped in a matchbox by mean children. I no longer had a soul, no brain, only fear. Now I recall that at one point I either lost consciousness, fell asleep, or lost my mind so completely that I simply stopped perceiving reality. One way or another, I woke up, and relived it all. I so wanted to believe that everything that had happened was nothing more than a terrible dream. And I believed, and I believed. I believed even when I again felt the threads and metal in my mouth. I believed when I again couldn't move, when I inhaled the disgusting smell of damp earth, when I ran my numb hands over the silk-lined lid of the coffin. I don't know how long I thrashed like this, but then apathy came over me, so strong that I simply froze, closed my eyes, and almost stopped breathing. In that moment, I realized what a joy it was to simply drink, eat, breathe, to be with an unstitched mouth, to bend my knees. How I wanted to bend my legs. It's simply amazing when you can't even feel your body and don't know what's happening to your legs, minute after minute. Believe me, 1 minute underground is an eternity. In a minute, something always changes in everyday life. A leaf falls from a tree, a car passes, a cloud blocks the spring sun. Underground, nothing changes in a minute. Every moment, you're literally torn apart by horror and hopelessness. Drop by drop, your mind and everything human within you are fading away forever. You cease to be human. You're not an animal, not a bird, not a lizard. You're a giant, hypertrophied amoeba, a huge mushroom, neither alive nor dead, nothing. Years will pass, generations will pass, people will live, die, fight, buy, trade, celebrate, and you will lie here forever. In this same suit, in this humble pose, first alive, then dead. Only this will change in a moment. Life is full of difficult and complex situations. A person can find themselves in the middle of a burning house, in the hold of a crashing ship, in a falling plane. All these and other similar situations have one thing in common. You hope. You hope the fire will be put out, the rescue ship will arrive in time, and the pilot will manage to level the plane at the last moment. Even doomed people have the luxury of hope before death, except for those in a situation similar to mine. There's no hope here. You've been buried deliberately, bidden farewell forever with no reason to dig you up again. It's terrible. So I continued to lie there. Panic was eating me up from the inside, but I couldn't let it out with a scream, a punch, or anything else. My head was simply working terribly, producing neither words nor coherent thoughts. They were replaced by cloudy, indistinct images and feelings, each worse than the last. Slowly but surely, I sank into delirium. Right now, I could calculate exactly how many brain cells I lost during my burial from lack of oxygen. But that would be pointless. An hour passed, maybe even 10. I retreated deeper and deeper into myself, drenched in sweat and tears, whining and continuing to aimlessly run my hands along the cramped walls of my own crypt. A minute, another minute, another minute, a minute. Once again, awakening from my delirium, I found something in my hands. Due to the cold and many other factors, I had almost lost my sense of touch. It took a long time to understand what it was, but when I did, I couldn't explain it. That hope of the doomed appeared, the very right to hope that I mentioned earlier. It was a cell phone. I remembered the addendum to my will, a kind of last will and testament, which mentioned the cell phone. Lord, how grateful I was to my wife for remembering my small request. My head cleared. Joy burst forth in fresh bursts of sobbing and impatient moans. It took some time just to turn on the phone. It was difficult with my numb hands, but I managed. It vibrated welcomingly, and for the first time in forever, I saw light, green, painfully bright, yet so familiar and pleasant. Now the seconds flew by at breakneck speed. I almost felt the time whistling past. For a long, long time I stared at the screen. What was it saying? A pound-weight boulder fell on my chest when I finally made out the inscription. There was no SIM card in the phone. That's impossible, I thought. But the damn phone thought otherwise. I started searching my pockets but found nothing there. My tears were making everything blurry. Finally, I managed to wipe my eyes with a handkerchief in my breast pocket and, using the light from the display as a flashlight, methodically searched every visible area. I nearly burst into a joyful exclamation when I discovered the SIM card, discreetly tucked into my right lapel. A piece of paper with the PIN code written down was also there. Meanwhile, my situation was becoming increasingly dire. I was mercilessly drowsy from lack of oxygen, and the unbearable cold was making my body grow increasingly numb. But I couldn't give up now. I had to turn off the phone to insert the card. Oh, I've been a surgeon for over 30 years, and by virtue of my profession have excellent hand dexterity, but I've never encountered a task more challenging than this. My hands refused to obey the commands of my weakened brain. The damn SIM card kept falling out, and I had to fumble for it. All sorts of extraneous, completely unnecessary thoughts kept me from focusing on my main goal. I'd thought of so many things during that time. What if there's no money on the SIM card? What if the phone can't get a signal from underground? What if my wife wrote down the PIN incorrectly? What if something else happened that I hadn't foreseen? But a miracle happened, and now after another eternity, the phone vibrates in my hand again, and the green light of the screen dispels the darkness. The signal strength indicator showed that I could make calls, but it wouldn't hurt to get out into more open terrain. I thought so too. My hand automatically dialed the number for the emergency room at my home hospital. I knew the call would be answered by either the incredibly fat and bitchy Enid, who was always losing her glasses and herpes ointment, or the spinster Jessica, who would spend her days drinking herbal tea and playing solitaire on tattered, impossibly greasy cards. I was ready to kiss either one right then and there. The line rang for a while, then Enid's rough voice came on. My heart skipped a beat, and tears streamed down my cheeks again, threatening dehydration or, at the very least, a minor flood. And I screamed with joy and, barely containing my overwhelming emotions, explained to Anne that a terrible mistake had been made and I was alive, but none of this was happening. I only mumbled incoherently because my mouth was glued, stitched, and held together with iron staples. Enid repeats, "Hello, I'm listening," several more times before hanging up. I drop the phone and lose consciousness. When I come to again, I can barely recall everything that happened. My head is literally splitting with pain. The air is thinning, and the minutes are counting down. While I was unpacking my mouth, while I was ripping out the strings and the staples from my gums, consciousness left me at least 10 times. By the end, I was not even conscious, but semi-conscious, unable to comprehend anything and unable to understand who I was, where I was, or what was happening to me. All my strength, mental, moral, and physical, was now directed toward a single action: making a phone call. That conversation is vaguely reminiscent of a long-forgotten episode from a childhood dream. Enid didn't believe me at first, saying that if it was a joke, it was a very stupid one. Then I think she hung up. I called again, and again she didn't believe me. I had to strain my brain to find a few memories connected only to us. To her credit, after confirming it was indeed me, she didn't faint or lose her composure. She spoke quickly into the phone, but I couldn't make out her words. The sounds, the images before my eyes, the feelings, the fears, the thoughts, everything merged into a single, unified whole, and I completely blacked out. They managed to save me. I won't tell you how long it took me and all my family to recover from what happened. It's boring and, in my opinion, rather tedious. All those rehabilitation courses, psychological help, the phobias and fears that arose in the wake of what happened. These are all details that, if necessary, you can fill in for yourself. It's time to end. I've thought long and hard before about how cruel life can be. We're all afraid of death, but in vain. Death is inevitable, straightforward, and honest. But life is not. Life offers countless bad options. It is scornful and merciless to everyone without exception. Sooner or later, life will throw you a surprise you won't even believe your eyes. Death, in this regard, is more humane. I think about this every day now. You might ask, what am I talking about? Well, here's why. As I've told you this, you might have asked questions. Why did the doctor who examined my body so readily declare me dead? Why did the doctors decide not to perform an autopsy? How was it that everything was ready for the ceremony the very next day after my death? And finally, How did a 52-year-old man come up with a detailed will, especially one with a last will and testament? It was as if everyone had been preparing for my demise. The fact is, everyone, including myself, was indeed preparing for the funeral. 3 months before the incident I described, the doctors gave me a grim diagnosis: stage 4 lung cancer. People with such a diagnosis typically don't survive even 6 months, so it's not a diagnosis, but a death sentence. Just like that. I don't want to pity anyone, but imagine how I feel now. A miraculous escape. To have been in the grave and emerged only to return again a month or 2 later. Isn't this proof of the vile nature of life, which we all love? I'm living out my days and never cease to be amazed. Who in heaven could I have angered so much that they played such a cruel joke on me? It's terrifying, astonishing, and absurd, but above all, it's incredibly offensive. The last days of my existence have turned into some kind of diabolical joke, one that can only be laughed at, and even then through tears. And I laugh because I have nothing else to do. And one last thing, I recently visited my first grave. I asked that it be left, along with the tombstone which still bears my name and date of death. You know, my dear friend, if it's left untouched, I'll probably be the only person in all of Britain with not 1, but 2 graves. And that's another one of my deathbed jokes. There you go. That's it. I'll leave it at that. I wish you all the best. David Catton died on June 23rd at the age of 53, the morning of his birthday. He is buried in a small cemetery in the suburbs of Harlow. It is known for certain that before his death, he asked his wife not to place his mobile phone in his new grave.